All right. If we could, what would be really helpful for me maybe is just to go around the room and kind of get an idea of folks' background, maybe why you guys are in the course, or maybe if you have had any exposure with personal protective equipment or have any need for it in the workplace, or maybe supervise a workforce that has a need to use personal protective equipment. And what we're talking about, you'll hear me say, PPE probably 100 times today. That is personal protective equipment. We're just talking about controls that can be put in place to keep an employee safe in a variety of different workplaces. So if we could, let's just start here maybe with Victoria. Do you mind to go around the room and just tell everyone, maybe who you are and what organization you're representing, and maybe what your interest or need is in the course?
My name's Victoria Armstrong, and I am a small business consultant. And quite frankly, my husband won't even let me use the mandolin in the kitchen. So I never get around anything dangerous. So this will be great new information for me.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Dorothy Graybell. I work here at Francis Tuttle. I'm Judy Robbins' assistant, but I've been in Francis Tuttle for 22 years, and I used to work in facility management. So I was in charge of the maintenance guys and their PPE, and so I'm pretty familiar with it, so I'm interested to see what Greg has to present today.
I'm Judy Robbins. I'm with Upland Assistance Network here at Francis Tuttle Technology Center. So I help small businesses who are pursuing government contracts. Looks like a lot of things that are required for general operation of a business in addition to government contract requirements. So I hope to learn a lot.
My name's Nathan with Olivas Construction. We specialize in concrete work. We've been doing a lot of federal highway work lately, and we want to, we're growing pretty quickly, and this is information I need to be aware of to get educated.
And you guys probably have safety plan requirements, I would guess, in those contracts for PPE and safety training, right? Okay. Can we go back here?
I'm Charity Mehagan. I'm with ODOT and Civil Rights Division, and I just want to learn more.
Okay, perfect.
I'm Michelle Whittington. I'm with ODOT, and I'm a contract compliance officer. So we go out on the construction sites, things like that. So I just figured this would probably be some good information to know. So.
Okay, absolutely.
Hi, I'm Jenny Chong. I'm with ODOT and Civil Rights. I have the Title VII, Title VI program.
And what is that? I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with it.
That's external and internal discrimination complaints. And I'm just here to learn more.
Okay.
I'm a girl from Civil Rights at ODOT, and I'm here to find out some more.
Okay.
Andy Penny with the Oklahoma DOT Contract Compliance Office. We dip a little bit into the safety issue when we're doing reviews.
Okay. Okay. And same thing on your end for the compliance side. You guys, I guess, are looking at safety issues for anyone that has a compliance responsibility with ODOT. I mean, that's one of the primary things you're looking at, probably, right?
We make sure that they're doing safety meetings, things like that. So.
I gotcha. And what are the requirements on those? Do you know, I mean, what they usually are off the top of your head, or no? Obviously it varies by contract, and most of what we do is federal contracts, so that's obviously what I'm most familiar with, but I'm just always curious to see how requirements of different entities vary among each other. So
We get OSHA out there every once in a while.
you do? Okay. What we're going to do today is run through this curriculum. There's only a couple sections here to go over. We do have a couple short videos to watch, and we'll start off with one of those here in just a moment. If you guys have any questions throughout the day, by all means, let us know, speak up. Obviously, I know you hear this in other training courses, but we really do want it to be an open dialogue, so I think I will probably learn as much or more than anyone else today. So if you guys have any questions, let me know, and if I have questions just for my own curiosity or the benefit of the course, I'll definitely ask also. And we'll keep it super casual if that works for you guys. That's my natural demeanor, if that's okay. So to get going here, let's go ahead and watch this first segment, which should be on workplace hazards. And also, just so you guys know, I haven't instructed this exact curriculum before, so bear with me as I bungle through it. But I think that there's probably no one better to teach a course on PPE than firefighter, to be honest. I mean, the types and different types and kinds of PPE styles, models of personal protective equipment that we utilize in the workplace to stay safe is immense. I mean, we have entire vehicles that are basically outfitted with PPE for every possible scenario that you could encounter. So PPE is definitely extremely important in our world. I mean, it's a daily factor of doing business for our personnel that are out in the field on fires every day. So, but with that being said, if you guys have a question that I can't answer, by all means, I'll let you know, and we'll find an answer to it. So, okay, any questions before we get going?
We've all heard the slogan, "Safety in the workplace begins with me." That phrase covers many different things, but one of the most important is personal safety and using personal protective equipment to keep yourself safe while at work. Just like a football player wouldn't hit the field without his helmet and pads, and a firefighter wouldn't go running into a burning building without his equipment, you shouldn't try to do your job without protecting yourself first. Hi, I'm Jordan, and I would like to talk to you about 3 things to do with personal protective equipment. 1, how your company will evaluate your workplace to determine what equipment you need. 2, what you should choose. And 3, how to properly wear and care for it to keep yourself safe. Let's get to it.
There are potential hazards in every workplace. Without protection, you could be at risk of being hurt or injured. Ideally, companies will try to control those hazards with proven strategies such as engineering controls and work practice controls. An engineering control uses a physical approach to provide protection, such as building a protective screen between an employee and a piece of equipment to keep the employee safe from flying debris. A work practice control means changing the way employees do their jobs to avoid potential hazard. In addition to engineering controls and work practice controls, personal protective equipment, often referred to as PPE, provide additional protections. Your company will conduct a hazard assessment to determine the best personal protective equipment to protect you in your workplace. When conducting the hazard assessment, potential hazards to employees' eyes, hearing, breathing, head, feet, and hands are focused on. Assessment questions regarding eyes will include things such as, are there flying particles from a grinder that could injure an eye? Are there chemicals, acid, or other caustic liquids that could cause burns or give off harmful vapors? Do strong lights exist that could injure an employee's vision? Excessive noise in a workplace can also be a hazard. Determining the need for hearing protection depends on things such as how loud the noise is, as measured in decibels, the length of an employee's exposure to the noise, whether an employee moves between different noise levels, and whether noise is generated from one or more sources. In regard to breathing, hazards such as airborne dust or particulates, or the possible inhalation of chemical vapors or fumes will be assessed. Hazards that remove adequate oxygen in a workspace will be identified. Identifying things such as falling objects or low-hanging obstructions will help determine methods to prevent potential injuries to the head. Identifying unsecured, rolling, or sharp objects on the floor or slippery walking surfaces will help minimize foot injuries. Things that could injure fingers will be identified. Harmful chemicals can be absorbed through the skin on your hands. Equipment can cut or crush fingers. Heat or chemicals can cause burns. And working outside in extremely cold conditions can raise the potential for frostbite. Work clothes will also be evaluated. Clothes must be appropriate for the work environment. Clothes need to provide protection from hot and cold temperatures, chemicals, or sharp materials. All that's a lot to consider, but most of it's just common sense. It just takes a few minutes to think about each workstation and the potential hazards each employee encounters while working. Also, anytime the job changes, you bring in new equipment or you change a technique,
you need to re-examine the workstation and the situation, make sure you still have the right personal protective equipment.
Okay, so I think probably the most important thing to take away from that short clip is, the use of personal protective equipment really boils down to common sense. That's how I feel about it. Obviously, there are going to be these controls in place and these policies and procedures, but ultimately, the burden resides with each individual worker to utilize common sense and use the PPE they need to be safe. Before we go any further, if you guys don't mind, maybe I'm probably going to pick on you, if that's all right, because everyone else in here, it sounds like, has a background with DOT. So being a small business person in construction, you have a lot of knowledge about what some of the unique hazards are to your industry that I'm less familiar with. So maybe you could just tell us, what are some of those, for just the normal kind of work that you guys do? What are the major hazards?
Well, as of now, for example, we're working at the turnpike right now, and we've noticed that having your hard hat on at all times is a real necessity there, especially at forklifts, man lifts. You have ongoing construction going on, and not necessarily just what we're doing. There's many companies in one place trying to do work, and as far as just having your earplugs on, because there's either you're jackhammering something or just the noise for the traffic, or just little things like that. It all boils down to, like you said, common sense. Things that we, providing gloves, because after a while that concrete and the chemicals that are put in the concrete and wear out your hands. So we try to provide all of that and just make it as safe as possible.
What about the traffic? I would assume, is that a major hazard for you guys?
It is, especially on this job. It's for example, we're required to have strobe lights, obviously, and signs, visible signs, letting regular traffic that this is a construction vehicle. Don't follow this construction vehicle. And it's very important to understand, because someone could easily get distracted. You rush in the center median, and they could easily follow you and hit the barrier wall. Or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Or get in the way of some of that heavy equipment you're talking about.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, that's all really good information. What about anyone else? I know a lot of the DOT folks. You guys probably have a ton of experience, the compliance folks, dealing with these contracts over the long run. I mean, are there any other hazards that you guys can think of out there for the vendors that are actually doing the work?
Well, we're out there a lot, so we kind of look at a lot of the issues out there. We always look to see if there are hard hats on desks. We look at the work zone as we go through, see how that's really set up. I always tell the contractor it's more important to drive through that themselves, learn their work zone, and then run again through the night times to see what it really looks like, because there's a lot of issues out there. Some of the projects that we look at is like pipe jobs and stuff like that. So we look at the trench and see if they have any bracing on it, any kind of fall protection on bridge specs, whether they're tied on or not. Just kind of safety lines.
What about on the work zone? Basically, I guess what you're getting at is the way that they lay out their actual work zone could, some ways would be safer than others, right?
Yeah, we always give them a work plan and a set of plans, but that's not always the right way to do it, because the scope of work changes, and the traffic is different, and you kind of just look at the traffic flow and see what it is that day, and you have to sometimes adjust your work zone.
Maybe like if they're like merging lanes down too quick, I guess, or not giving people enough time to slow down. Would that be the kind of things that you're looking at?
And then sometimes there's a speed limit issue. It should have really been adjusted to be a little bit lower than what it is.
I see.
Because of the volume of traffic and the equipment that's on the project at the time.
Okay.
But we kind of stress, hey, if you're out there and people can see you, you need to be wearing your vest.
Gotcha.
We drive through the jobs. One time, we'll drive through the job. They don't have vests on. They see the car. We drive back through, and all of a sudden they have their vests and hard hats on. So I don't know. For all the contractors in the room, they don't want to listen to that. But we do look at that and always mention it to, you know, their supervisor at the time. Hey, we drove through, we didn't see anybody with safety vests on. We drove through again, all of a sudden everybody had them on. You guys not, you know, require them. It's federally funded jobs, and
Yeah.
you should be wearing your vests and hard hats.
Isn't it amazing how quickly that people, myself included, I've been guilty of it, can spot the regulars when they show up on a work site and get, you know, make sure that they're in compliance. That is no different than our world. You know, it's common on fires. You'll see folks out there doing things they shouldn't be doing, not wearing their gloves, have their sleeves rolled up, just, you know, things you don't need to be doing on the fire line. And a safety officer comes walking down the line or driving down the line, and it seems like people can spot the safety officer a mile away and somehow get those gloves on and get those sleeves rolled down quick. But yeah, that's all good information for me because, like I said, I'm a lot less familiar with the work area that you guys have. But you know, the types of hazards that our personnel deal with on a daily basis are much different, but in a way they're very similar. You know, the hazards that we're dealing with are environmental conditions, which is no different than you guys. We're dealing with aircraft a lot, which is somewhat different, and of course the fire itself. But we deal with the public a lot. That's one of our major hazards, and with you guys even more so, being on the side of a roadway where, you know, the flow of traffic maybe is altered due to what you're doing out there. So, I mean, there are definitely some similarities there that I can see. So as we saw in the video, you know, there's a number of different ways that we can control those hazards, right? So there's the work controls and the engineering controls, you know, which define what the work controls are, but ultimately it's the PPE often that's, you know, the last line of resort, if you really think about it, to keep people safe. So it's amazing how little it takes for someone to be injured on the work site, and it's also amazing what major inconvenience and impediment that can be to progress for the small business, for the contracting organization. I mean, it just really can be a massive nightmare even for the smallest of injuries, to be honest, that can drag on for years in terms of documentation and issues with it. And I've definitely dealt with that firsthand many times, both as a government employee and also now in the private sector. So that's why the PPE is so vitally important. What else?
Mark, I do have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm not sure who could answer it, but surely someone here has had experience with it. If an employee decides to roll up their sleeves in a fire line, or they decide that they don't need that hard hat and they just don't put it on, and then they get hurt, who's responsible? And what happens then?
I can tell you just from my own personal experience, you know, if we have an injury and the proper PPE was not utilized, then our company will endure some intense scrutiny from especially our workers' comp provider, and that has happened to us before actually. You know, that's one thing that they do because you know, injuries happen in our world, and they come in, and that's the first thing that an investigator will do is look to see if the proper PPE was utilized. So I would assume it's the same. Do you have more knowledge about that?
I just have another question. And this is just, I'm just curious, but like with construction stuff, or even with firefighting, when you're out there in the heat, or when they're out there working in the heat on construction, I mean, like, if it's really hot, like, how do you, like, would they still wear, you know, like, all their safety equipment, and with the heat, and, I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
Like, how does that work?
Absolutely, and I would assume for you guys it's much the same as us. I mean, our work is done out in the woods, but we're dealing with fires and that sort of thing. For construction companies on the side of the road, I would assume that it's miserable in the summertime with the heat.
There's safety vests that are so hot.
Yeah.
You know, you can't really breathe in those. So it's our job to find the best equipment that is breathable, and just make sure they get, you know, breaks and enough liquids in.
Do you give them more breaks in the summertime?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep. And you know, the heat stress, heat stroke, and heat exhaustion, I mean, there's 3 different levels of heat-related illness there, but you know, those are extremely serious. People will die from heat stroke every year. You know, when you hear about the heat waves, and they always talk about people dying, you know, other than maybe the elderly, which are often stricken, it's often people that work, you know, like us in outside professions, and so and that's what causes that. Typically when you hear there's so many heat-related deaths, it's heat stroke. They literally their body cannot regulate the amount of heat, that they're taking on. Yes, ma'am.
When you're hiring new people and so forth, do you train them to look for the signs of someone else having a problem with a heat issue, for instance?
Well, absolutely. Most of our folks are EMTs, emergency medical technicians, and experienced firefighters, so they're familiar with that. But what's that?
Out on his side there.
But yeah, is that something that you guys
It's
train
something
for?
we haven't looked into. It's something that would be an option to look into.
I think more than anything, it's common sense. In my experience, the times that I've been involved with those situations where we've had someone that had a serious heat-related illness and had to be life-flight or medevac to the hospital, which is a couple times I've dealt with that. I mean, even to the layperson, it would be obvious that they weren't healthy, if you know what I mean. I mean, the number one, signal, I mean, there are numerous signs and symptoms, but the number one most critical is when they start to have an altered mental status. And so, it's obvious that if someone has an altered mental status, they can't communicate normally, and, maybe they're either passing out or they're unable to communicate with you coherently, then, even to the layperson, obviously they need some treatment.
And that is, there should be some sort of training. I know it's sort of a common sense deal, but last year, I had 4 incidents happen exactly with that heat stress. And, it's one of those deals to where you think you know what to do, but in reality, sometimes it just doesn't all click.
Yeah.
And it's fortunate that it wasn't in a federal aid project; it was more of a commercial. But yeah, it's very important to get informed and have a workshop for them, because it's something that.
Absolutely.
If it gets too hot, do you ever not work? I'm just curious, is there ever a time where it gets too hot to not do certain things on the job?
Well, yeah, it's for example, in our case, let's say it's 105, 110 degrees outside, we'll go ahead and try to plan on setting up pretty early or pouring at midnight.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we
you
have
change
to
your work time sometimes?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
And that might be something, not for a shameless plug, that we might be able to help you with too. If you need some first aid, safety training, we do lots of other stuff too. And there's, opportunities out there for, grants and that sort of thing too for small businesses for free training. So, but yeah, it sounds like, one issue that I would definitely relay along with the heat-related illnesses that we're talking about is that, extreme heat doesn't relieve an employee or an employer of the responsibility, unfortunately, to not wear the safety equipment that's maybe required by regulation. But there are some things, it sounds like, that you can do to, whether it be altering your work patterns or whatever it may be to kind of accommodate. Did any of those 4 situations that you had turn out seriously, or what was kind of the background on those?
It was more of their personal health.
Yeah.
They were at an age to where they just couldn't handle the heat and the work itself. And their problem was they'd never said anything. And at that point, it seemed as if every man was for himself. So I didn't find out till later on. The guy had passed out, and I had to go get him and rush to the hospital. But
Was he okay?
He's okay, yeah. Everything was okay, but it's one of those deals to where providing breathable vest, or enough water and Gatorade, and keep that constant communication with the employees, and we could avoid something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's scary. I mean, that's too close to. I'm glad he's all right. All right. Well, getting back here, I got off topic there a little bit. Sorry, that happens a lot. But these are all good questions. I think that it's all good learning opportunity for everyone in here. Okay, so backing up, typically what each company will do or should do is conduct a hazard assessment to determine what PPE is, the best, going to be the best source of protection in each individual workplace. And one thing that we did, this might be of interest to you, is we utilized grant monies through the VOTEC system to have a consultant come in and do a comprehensive safety plan for our company and hazard assessment. And it was extremely thorough, and it didn't cost us a thing, or maybe cost us a fraction of what it would otherwise. I don't remember. I think it might not have cost anything. So that might be something to look at. But basically, that's your baseline for what PPE has got to be utilized in the field. And so that safety or hazard assessment, if you have a comprehensive safety or hazard assessment for the company, is going to determine, what are our company policies in terms of PPE. Now, often there's already, industry standards in place, whether through regulation or otherwise. And so obviously those would be incorporated into that safety plan or that hazard assessment to include compliance with all those regulations in terms of PPE for workers. Some of the questions they ask are, are there flying particles from something like a grinder that could injure someone's eye? Are there chemicals or other caustic things, liquids, acids, whatever, that could damage someone's respiratory system or could give off a chemical and burn them? Another issue is excessive noise in the workplace. I know in our workplace that's a major issue. We work around all kinds of crazy equipment that's super loud, pumps and chainsaws and helicopters, and so that's a major issue for our folks. And any workplace where you have heavy equipment, obviously, there's a major concern for noise damage to someone's hearing, and major concern for hearing conservation. Also, with regards to breathing, there's a couple things that we need to be concerned about that should also be looked at in the hazard assessment for each company, which is, first of all, are there any airborne dust or particulates? And then second of all, are there any caustic materials that could be inhaled? So are there any chemicals that if they were inhaled would be dangerous for an employee? And then second of all, are there any, is there any particulate matter, is what it's called, that could be ingested maybe unbeknownst to the employee, and it would lodge in the respiratory system and become an issue many years later. And I would assume you guys probably work around that, concrete and stuff. Is that a concern for you?
It has been a concern, and we were actually on a job at St. Anthony's, and that's where I learned the significance of keeping the dust, concrete dust, in check, because it's if someone were to inhale that, you may not see immediate, but it could affect you in the long run.
Absolutely. The effects of that are exactly over the long run. And what happens is, someone may ingest that or inhale the dust or other fine particulate matter and think that everything's fine, especially if they've had numerous and repeated exposures, maybe over the course of doing that kind of work for many years. And then down the road, they'll discover that they have diminished lung function, and in some cases, severely diminished lung function because.
One of the things that people never realize, if they handle concrete all the time, you can actually get concrete poisoning. It will go right through your skin. So that's why you're always wearing rubber gloves when you're out on that job site or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah.
Some of the other issues he's talking about, concrete dust is one of them. Lime, we're always mixing lime out on the job. Fly ash out on the job, kiln dust, it's all out there on the projects that we do.
Lots of things with what we're talking about is lots of materials that have a really fine particulate matter that can get down in people's lungs, and like you said, the biggest concern is people inhale that. Maybe it doesn't have a great impact on them at the time, but years down the road, especially after repeat exposures, that can really become a major issue.
And if you're dealing with concrete like you do, you use form oils a lot. Linseed oils.
And what is that? I mean, I'm familiar with those, but what do they do to kind of stabilize it and keep the dust from?
Right.
Okay.
It's a concrete cure type spray that you put on that. Form oil, you spray it on your form so the concrete doesn't stick to the forms.
I gotcha.
But all that stuff's pretty hazardous. Some of that stuff has trichloride and stuff like that in there. So it's highly contagious or highly
caustic
chemical in there. You're not supposed to get it on your hands. All kinds of warning labels on there. But I always see people out there in their bare hands and they're touching that stuff. And over time, it's going to do some effects to them.
Well, did you say linseed oil was one of the things you use? We actually use linseed oil a lot too for our tools, our hand tools, to refurbish them. And I'd used it for years just with bare hands when I was a firefighter, and our personnel still did. And I didn't even realize until like last summer there's actually a lot of really bad chemicals in there, and that you need to have some proper controls in place for that one.
What people don't realize either, if you get it on cloth or whatever, set that cloth over in the sun, it'll catch fire by itself.
You learn something new every day.
When you talk about gloves for concrete and gloves for linseed oil and using something to keep concrete dust out of, are there minimum manufacturing standards for these different products that are specific to jobs? And how do you figure out if you're actually buying the right type of product
Mhm.
for the job at hand.
Well, I think there's two ways, and tell me if you guys agree with this. One is, first of all, you have to look at what the regulations require, and typically the manufacturers are going to abide by or cater to that. But second of all, the workers are often going to let you know too. I mean, that's how it is in our world. If you purchase something that's not adequate in terms of protecting them, I mean, they're going to let you know, hey, these aren't working.
Yeah, and most of your gear has what, American Industrial Safety.
ANSI.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It'll have a stamp on there already.
Yep.
So that's how you can tell.
Absolutely.
All chemicals, all manufacturers are regulated by the government to provide what they call a material safety data sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And it tells you on the material safety data sheet what equipment you should be using to protect yourself while you're using that chemical.
Yep, absolutely. And every workplace that has a potential for exposure to any of those chemicals should have that on file for their workers. And so that's also a part of the safety plan or hazard assessment. Is what you would do is look at, in this workspace or in this industry, what are all the possible chemicals that we might be exposed to, and then basically, you're required by law to have those MSDS sheets on file for any chemical that your workers may come in contact with.
And sometimes when we're out on the job site, we'll go in their work trailer and look at stuff, and we'll see their chemicals in there, and whether they have lockout tags or not on some of their stuff.
And is that required for some of the chemicals that are used?
Yes.
Does it happen that the lockout tags are used?
No.
Yeah. So what can
Sometimes you don't even see the data sheet hanging there.
Yeah, you don't see it hanging there. So, not to get too far off track, but from the compliance end for you guys, I mean, what can you do in those types of situations? I mean, what are the options?
We pretty much just write them up and tell the supervisor at the time, this is what we observed out there, and these are the recommendations that we recommend.
Are there any repercussions in terms of financial on the contract for that, or?
It depends on how far it gets.
Uh-huh.
We're more out there doing EEO stuff, but we also give them a little bit of safety. We'll recognize it to the supervisor that we see these problems.
I see.
If they don't do it, we also go to federal highways with it.
I see.
And they step in and take care of the problem.
And I would assume, like any other industry, you have certain vendors that maybe do a little bit better job than others of abiding by the safety standards.
Yeah, you'd think the bigger contractors would be complying with all the rules and regulations, but sometimes they don't. Some of the smaller people, they do. But then you get a new firm out there and they don't really know or understand everything they're supposed to be doing.
I've seen that before, and I think maybe the reason for it is, once an organization reaches a certain size, there's a certain insulation from not following the rules exactly how they're supposed to. Whereas, when you're a very, very small business, maybe or just starting out in the industry, if you're trying to do things right as you should, then that's one way that you can kind of set yourself apart is by following the rules to a T exactly how you
The
should.
larger firms that do other work outside of ODOT, and have OSHA looking at them all the time. Yeah, they're by the book.
I gotcha.
Because they know somewhere down the line, if they get caught, they'll be written up, they'll be fined.
I see. But there are no fines associated with the ODOT
We
inquiries?
get them for what we call liquidated damages, so if there's a problem on there, then we can back charge them.
I gotcha.
Some money off that contract.
Did you have something else?
Do any of your companies you deal with, because we don't have our MSDS sheets out anymore because we've got it online, but we have the number posted everywhere. Does any of your companies?
Most of them, they'll have their sheets in their trailer. Some of them do put a mailbox in there and they put everything in there. So sometimes we'll look at that. But a lot of them, yes, they'll have all the chemicals online. That way, there's one contact number, they call that, fire department will call that, find out everything that they have in there. And that's the easier way to do it than having a paper copy that no one ever keeps track of.
Yeah, absolutely.
How many times is it updated?
Yeah, not like it should be.
Somebody drops off chemicals once a week and they don't change anything.
Well, good. That's all good discussion, guys. I'm learning a lot, as I told you. We probably all would. But get back on track here just for a second to kind of finish out this unit. Some of the other things to look at in that safety plan or hazard assessment, basically anything that could injure an employee, okay? So it could be unsecured, could be rolling items, could be falling objects, anything that's going to cause any loss to appendages, anything that could cause fingers or toes to be smashed or severed. And then the work clothes themselves are going to be evaluated relative to the work that's actually being done to ensure that the highest level of safety is being provided there. And then, every time that the job changes, as we heard on the video, there ought to be a reassessment, a common sense reassessment at the work site level, and then also a comprehensive reassessment at the, kind of corporate level to ensure that that job has been reviewed in terms of the safety controls that need to be in place for it. It's best to use the PPE that is most effective, most safe, the safest, most effective, and most comfortable, because that's what employees are going to revert to. If some item of their PPE is inherently annoying or uncomfortable, that's probably going to be the first thing that they elect to leave off until they see the ODOT car driving by. So that's why it's important, for companies to not only find the PPE that's compliant, with the regulations, but to also find that PPE that works for the employee to actually be able to do their job efficiently. And that happens sometimes too. I've definitely ran into those situations where maybe there's a certain unique type of PPE that's required for a certain project or task, and you have the correct PPE for the regulation, and the employees will come in and say, look, we can't do the work while wearing this kind of PPE. It just doesn't work for whatever reason. So those situations certainly come up too. And that ANSI standard is really important too. It's the American National Safety Institute, or American National Standards Institute. Essentially regulates all of that. And so it's really important to ensure that ANSI stamp, or ANSI, however people say it different ways, is on that PPE that you're utilizing. And the employer has an obligation to ensure that that PPE meets those requirements. So, do you guys have any questions on that unit? Not at all. Would you guys be opposed to taking a short break? No? To get some coffee, maybe use the restroom? Okay. Well, if you guys want, let's just go ahead and take between 10 and 15 minutes here and get a drink and take a restroom break, and then we'll jump into this next unit.